Hi everyone, welcome to the Getty Villa. We're broadcasting on Facebook Live. We are delighted to present you our next exhibition here at the Villa. Facebook Live actually is maybe something of a misnomer today because not only is it Halloween, but we are broadcasting from the world of the dead. Our latest exhibition, which opens in about half an hour, is titled Underworld, Imagining the Afterlife. And it opens to the public in about half an hour. But I wanted to be able to provide all of you with an opportunity to have a glimpse of the exhibition and a sort of little sneak preview of many of the objects in the show. Please do let us know where you are watching from. We'll be happy to take questions and we will try to answer them in the course of this broadcast or afterwards. I should introduce myself. I'm David Saunders, one of the curators of at the Villa and the curator of this exhibition. This has been a project I've been working on for the last 2 years, and we are really excited to be able to present it to all of you. The show, as the title indicates, is all about the dead, and again, this is rather timely today with Halloween. We're looking in particular at how the ancient Greeks imagined the afterlife, what they envisioned, what they expected. And we'll be looking at both the mythological components of that, many of the famous figures of the underworld, Sisyphus, Hades, Persephone, Kerberos, and then going into some more detail as to how individuals thought about where they were going to be going and how they tried to control their fate, and particularly how they, shall we say, tried to guarantee a better lot in the afterlife. So we're looking at the 5th, 4th centuries BC in Greece and southern Italy, and it's a really interesting period. This is before the sort of creation, the invention of heaven and hell, but we're starting to see a sort of initial articulation of these ideas in this exhibition. So please, as I say, join me inside. Please let us know where you're watching from. I'm going to show you the inspiration for the exhibition. First of all, this magnificent, large, colossal even, volute crater. This is a South Italian ceramic vessel made in around the middle of the 4th century BC. It is, as I say, roughly my height. It's a huge thing. This is one of the largest South Italian vases that I'm aware of. And as you see, it is elaborately decorated with a vision of the underworld. This is an object on loan to us from the Museo Archeologico Nazionale in Naples, and over the last 10 years we've developed a really rich and fruitful collaborative program with our colleagues in Naples, working on a number of objects in their collection, working to conserve them and allow them to be displayed again. And this is, as I say, the latest in this series of projects that we've undertaken. We began, as I said, 2 years ago. The vase came to us in 2016, and it had been found in multiple fragments in 1847 at the site of Altamura in southern Italy. And as was very conventional for the time, the vase was put back together again. We know it had been reconstructed by 1851. But 150 or so years later, many of those repairs were starting to show their age and impact the stability and viability of the vessel itself. And so what we've been doing over the last 2 years is developing a way to guarantee the long-term stability of this particular object. And our conservators, Eric Risser and Will Shelley, have created an internal support that redistributes the weight of the mouth and the handles more evenly within the vessel, allowing for its future display. With that work done, we've also been able to identify the areas that have been restored, the areas that were added in the 19th century, and we can talk a little bit about that later. But just to give you an overview of the scene on the front, which again provides the inspiration for this show, what you're seeing here is Persephone and Hades in their palace in the underworld with these marvelous caryatid type figures supporting the temple, and surrounding them are all the figures you might expect to see in the underworld. This is a veritable who's who of the afterlife. Imagine this as a sort of movie poster, if you will, for the kind of people you will expect to find. Mythical figures such as the judges of the dead, Triptolemus, Rhadamanthus and Iacchos, the Danaids, eternally pouring water. We have underneath the palace of Hades, Heracles and Kerberos. Heracles has come down to Hades to retrieve Cerberus as one of his labours. Hermes is here to guide his safe passage. To the left you have Sisyphus eternally rolling his rock with a number of Furies, punishing figures watching over him. To the right here is Orpheus, and we'll talk a little bit more about Orpheus and his significance later on. And up at the top, the children of Heracles and their mother Megara, who were killed by Heracles in a fit of madness. So this is a real poster piece for the underworld. This kind of vessel would have been made for a funeral. This is an elaborate display piece. It has a hole in the bottom, so could never have been used to hold anything necessarily. It was rather placed in the grave as part of the funerary ceremonies, and would no doubt have been part of a very elaborate assemblage of gifts to a prominent member of the local community who had died. So the opportunity to display this vase with this very, very rich scene really prompted this whole exhibition. What I wanted to do in this show is provide something of an idea of the thoughts and beliefs that were circulating at the time in the 4th century when this vase was made. Because one of the questions that I am still grappling with, and I encourage visitors to the show and all of you to help me with this, is really what kind of message is this image evoking? This is, as I said, a kind of overview of the underworld, but we're seeing both figures who visit the underworld and who can return from it, such as Orpheus, such as Heracles. We're also seeing figures who are stuck in the underworld forever, such as Sisyphus. So there's a wide variety of images. It's not only those suffering terribly, but those who are able to enter and return. Is this in some way a consolatory image? Is this sort of inspiring to the mourners? These are all questions that I want to explore now that the exhibition is up and running. I should say a little about sort of beliefs about the afterlife in ancient Greece. Going back to the Odyssey, Homer is our earliest source for Greek ideas about the afterlife, and for the most part, in ancient Greece, the expectation was that when you died, your soul would go to Hades and would exist in a rather uninspiring state. We know from the Odyssey, Achilles, Ajax, many of the great heroes, they dwell in the underworld, but it's really kind of rather dank and boring and uninspiring. There are very few exceptional figures who suffer for eternity, such as Sisyphus, who you see here, also on the Athenian vase that we displayed earlier. I think, do we have a question?
We do have a question. Someone asked, what about Persephone? And they might have missed the part where you pointed her out on
Sure,
the
Persephone
vase.
is here right in the center of the vase, side by side with Hades. And we explore the myth of Persephone a little later on in the exhibition. She is absolutely integral, and it's particularly timely as well this time of year in the Villa Gardens. The pomegranates are fruiting, and of course that fruit is very significant in her story. And I'll show you a great example of Persephone as well in a moment. So Hades and Persephone rule in the underworld in what is, as I said, a fairly dank and uninspiring place. A handful of figures suffer for eternity, such as Sisyphus. Maybe I can show you another example on one of the other vases in this show. This is one of my absolute favourites. And here we see Persephone again in the centre. This is a vase on loan to us from the Museo Iatta in Ruvo. You see Persephone at the centre holding these two torches, if you're looking for costume inspiration for Halloween. She and Hades are overseeing the punishment of Pirithous and Theseus. Pirithous and Theseus go down in the underworld. Pirithous wants to abduct Persephone. That is a remarkably foolish idea for a human to try to abduct a god, let alone a ruler of the underworld. And what you see here is this fierce fury binding the two figures down in the underworld, and they will be stuck there for eternity. So this initial exhibition presents, centered around the big crater, some of the mythical figures that one might expect to encounter in the afterlife, and really provide a backdrop for the ideas that ancient Greeks and the South Italians who were familiar as well with many of these ideas. This big vase was made for a local South Italian community. We're seeing a kind of engagement of different cultures in many of these scenes produced for the South Italian market. And as I say, this first gallery provides this mythical, shall we say, overview of many of the famous figures. In the second part, in the second part of the exhibition, what I wanted to do was swivel in another direction, think a little bit as to how individuals dealt with this prospect. I think I have another question.
Another question. Yeah. How old are these vases? They seem so more current in presentation of how the figures are drawn.
Yeah, so most of the objects in the show date from around the 5th and the 4th centuries BC, so around 2,500 years. As I mentioned, particularly with the large crater, it was discovered in the 19th century and substantially restored, so we were dealing with a combination, if you will, of ancient and 19th century. But as I say, our focus here is very much on what we would call the archaic and the classical periods. And so this is, as I said, before the invention of ideas of heaven and hell that many contemporary religions that we were familiar with espouse. And it's been really fun and interesting for me to kind of explore and see how individuals are grappling with some of these ideas as to where you might go after you die. With that, let's move into the next section of the exhibition to touch on some of those themes. One of the really most exciting and for me rich parts of this project was to explore what are called mystery cults. And so beyond the standard gods of Greek religion, of Zeus and Athena and Poseidon, there is a whole other world, if you will, of sort of alternative belief, mystery religion we might call it, other cults for want of a better word, that provided alternative consolation, alternative opportunities. And we are focusing in particular on these because when it comes to thinking about the afterlife, these mystery cults provide that prospect of securing a happier lot. And in this little gallery, we have 3 gold tablets that are inscribed with instructions for what to do in the afterlife. You're seeing one that's in our collection. I wrote a blog about these, which I think went live yesterday, and I would encourage you to read, and maybe we could do a future broadcast focusing on these. They're really, really interesting. They really repay close viewing. These are tiny inscriptions written on thin sheets of gold that tell the dead where to go in the underworld, what to do, what to say. This is like your global entry on your passport, how to kind of secure a better place in the afterlife. And they're commonly called Orphic tablets. They received this name in the 19th century. Scholars associated them with the mythical singer and poet Orpheus, who goes down to the afterlife to recover his bride Eurydice. And displaying these gold tablets provided a really great opportunity for us here at the Villa to showcase one of our most extraordinary objects in the collection, the terracotta group of Orpheus with the sirens. Again, this comes from southern Italy in the 4th century BC, so roughly concurrent with the big vase that we began with. And you see Orpheus here, he would have been playing his lyre, almost competing against the sirens, these famous mythical singers, part bird, part woman, and the sirens notoriously would lure sailors to their death with their enticing voices. And then we know from the story of Jason and the Argonauts that Orpheus was able to prevail and beat them essentially, to conquer them with the power of his own song and literally prevail over death. And a composition like this, I think, served as a way of thinking about death, thinking about the prospect of signing up to sort of Orphic ideas, to associate oneself with Orpheus, and have that possibility of ensuring one's longevity and securing a happy afterlife. There is so much we can say about Orpheus. Again, I don't have time today, and encourage you to come and see the exhibition or consult the website where all of these objects are featured, and we have all the text panels presented. Orpheus is such a rich and dynamic feature, and even in antiquity he captured imaginations. He was something of a fringe figure, a challenging, alternative, shall we say, figurehead for things that were different. We know, for example, from Euripides' play Hippolytus, Theseus in the play sort of attacks his son, criticizing him. Hippolytus' behavior is very strange. He's vegetarian, which in ancient Greece was very sort of challenging to the status quo, and he's sort of dismissed as a follower of Orpheus with these strange practices. Orpheus' story is so complicated and so compelling, but his power as a singer and a poet made him really good, shall we say, to think with and to think about. And it's not only the story with the sirens, but also that famous episode when he goes down to the underworld to try to recover his bride Eurydice. And again, there are so many loans in this exhibition that I was so thrilled that we were able to secure for this exhibition. This particular marble relief on loan from our colleagues in Naples, an extraordinary depiction of this profoundly poignant moment where Eurydice finally bids farewell to Orpheus. Orpheus has gone down to the underworld after Eurydice has died, and Orpheus has tried with his power as a singer and a poet to persuade the lords of the underworld, to persuade Hades and Persephone to release Eurydice. And he is able to do so. The magic of his song, the magic of his lyre is so entrancing, so compelling, that Hades and Persephone say, yes, Eurydice may return to the world above. Just make sure as you're leaving the underworld, you don't look back at her. But of course, Eurydice is following Orpheus, and Orpheus can't resist that temptation to see his bride once more. He turns back and loses her forever.
And Laura Kaiser asks, who is next to Eurydice?
So fortunately for us, these figures are identified. They're actually named at the top. So you see Eurydice in the middle, Orpheus written backwards, and on the left is the god Hermes. And Hermes is one of the recurrent figures in this exhibition. One of the sort of sub-themes I wanted to explore are these rare figures who can go down into the afterlife and come back. For most humans, for most figures, going down into the underworld was a one-way ticket. But there are very few figures who are able to transition between the two, and Hermes, as the messenger god, is one of those few exceptional figures who can transition between the two, and he leads the dead down, and that's what you're seeing him doing down here. So to say, this relief is wonderful to be able to display. It's a rare example of this scene from the ancient world. Another really wonderful object that maybe we can focus on just for a moment is this fragmentary vase on loan to us from the museum in Taranto, which again shows this story of Orpheus's descent into the underworld, and it's very fragmentary, but only published in 2008, I think. But again, showing Orpheus's descent into the underworld, and you see him on the front around here, if we can get in a little close, gesturing towards Eurydice as he's about to lose her for that last time. Hermes is again here wearing his hat, pulling him away from the underworld, and Charon is waiting impatiently, ready to lead him back to the upper world. And I think I have another question as well.
You do. It's
sure.
about the last object you
about
spoke about. It's
sure.
How old is the relief?
The relief is actually a Roman era object from the 1st century AD, 1st century BC, but we think inspired or derived from a classical original. So most of the objects in the show are 5th, 4th century BC, with a couple of exceptions, later Roman objects. So as I say, please do keep corresponding. Let us know where you are writing from. We're going to move into the final gallery of the exhibition for the last sort of 5 minutes, I think, or so. And again, what I wanted to do is shed some light on these ideas about the afterlife and how one might secure a happier future, secure a happier existence in the beyond. And in this final gallery, we look at two sort of strategies, if you will, two pathways. Belief in Dionysus and initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yep.
So
One
Yes,
more
another
question about the
Yeah.
relief. Why do
Yeah.
you think the names are written backwards?
That's a question that I've been asked a number of times already, and I need to look into it. We know that there are certainly numerous inscriptions from ancient Greece, for example, where we find writing in one way or the other, and indeed in some cases writing in both directions. Why we're finding it there is not something it's something I need to dig into a little more. But certainly in antiquity, we see that facility in being able to read both left to right and right to left. So in the final gallery, as I say, we enter the world of Dionysus, and the gold tablets that I showed you in the previous section, commonly associated with Orpheus, but increasingly with new scholarship and new finds, the world of Dionysus seems to be just as important, if not more so. Those of you maybe were aware we had the play The Bacchae recently here at the Villa, which really manifested just how powerful and potent Dionysus is as a god. And I think he played a key role as a figurehead in beliefs about the afterlife. And Dionysus, people were able, as followers of the god, to secure a happy afterlife. And what I wanted to show in this section of the exhibition are some of the ways in which the afterlife might be envisaged as an eternal banquet. In talking about what a happy afterlife might involve, our literary sources are rather scattered. We have a few references here and there, but one thing that keeps coming up is the idea of the symposium, the idea of the feast. I think I have another question.
We have a general question. How many objects were loaned in order to create this exhibition?
So this is, we've been really lucky with the loans. There are about 36 objects in the exhibition, a few from our own collection, such as the Orpheus Group, but then we have loans from a variety of institutions in Italy, Germany, France, the UK and the US. So as I say, it's taken 2 years to pull this exhibition together, and indeed these particular objects, these terracottas, I saw in Taranto 2 years ago, and again through the generosity of our colleagues there, we are delighted to be able to display them. What you are seeing are a selection of terracotta reliefs, terracotta figures showing banqueters reclining on, for example, a couch here with all the accoutrements of a symposium, a lyre, a little drinking vessel. These seem to be associated with some component of funerary practices, and scholars debate as to who these figures might depict. But particularly in the ones that you're seeing now from the 4th century, very, very elaborate, very, very florid, wearing these really kind of rich reeds in their hair, reclining not only on couches, but even on animals, and on, in this particular case, up at the top, on a centaur, this mythical beast, part horse, part man, a centaur that you see holding a volute crater, a mixing vessel, and a lyre. This centaur is on his way to a symposium, and this man is reclining on the back of him. And this is a fabulous image of, really, I think, a view of what a happy afterlife might be, in which man and beast can coexist in harmony, mythical and mortal can exist side by side. And I think visions like this portray that hope for a happy existence in the beyond. The last section that I will show you, just in this very brief overview, and again I encourage you, please come to visit the exhibition, which is up until March the 18th, and we will be writing more about it and maybe doing more posts in the months to come. The final section looks at another strategy, if you will, for entering the underworld and achieving a happy afterlife, and that's through initiation in the Eleusinian mysteries, named after the town Eleusis in Greece, not far from Athens. The rituals there were kept secret. They were, so much of what I'm showing in this exhibition, these private cults that allowed individuals access or the hope for a happy afterlife, much of it was kept secret. It was, these were private initiations that allowed individuals a special experience. And in trying to present that in an exhibition obviously poses challenges. But what I wanted to focus on in particular is one of the most famous initiates at Eleusis. This is a festival celebrating Persephone and Demeter. The story that I touched upon earlier, Persephone descends to Hades. She is abducted by Hades. Demeter goes in search for her, and ultimately her daughter is recovered and Demeter installs this festival at Eleusis, and one of the most famous initiates is the gentleman that you see here, Heracles, and for his most terrifying and frightening labour, Heracles has to go down into the underworld to recover Kerberos, the frightening multi-headed dog. And because he is initiated in these special rituals, as you see here, Heracles is able to tame Kerberos and bring him up to the world above. I have a question, I think.
We have one question. Who would have originally owned these urns? Are they grave goods?
It's a great question. In many cases, yes, I think these vessels are made for the grave. The big vase that we began, as I said, that had a hole in the bottom, so it could never have served as a container. Many of the vases in the show, particularly from southern Italy, were made, I think, especially for elaborate graves and burials. Some of the others, such as the vase you see here, this was made in Athens, but exported to Etruria, perhaps initially as a container for grain or for oil or for wine, but ultimately buried in a grave, and that explains in many cases why these objects are preserved so fully. So thank you. I think my time down in the underworld is coming. I can hear Kerberos barking away, pulling me back. Thank you for joining us here. I'm happy to answer more questions. Please feel free to continue to follow us. Happy Halloween and enjoy the rest of your days.